On a quiet street in Frederick, Colorado, there was a house that looked like thousands of others. 2 stories, a trimmed lawn, children's toys scattered in the yard. Nothing about it suggested danger. Nothing about it hinted that inside those walls, a decision had already been made, long before anyone noticed something was wrong. Because the most disturbing
Hello?
crimes
Is
rarely
anyone home?
begin with violence. They begin with silence. Shanann Watts was someone who lived publicly. She documented her days, her work, her family. Friends described her as energetic, driven, and deeply devoted to her children. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was visible. If something was wrong, she talked about it. Chris Watts was the opposite. Quiet, reserved, emotionally distant. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't complain. To most people, that looked like stability. In reality, it was something else entirely. By early 2018, the marriage was under strain. Financial pressure had been building for years. Medical issues with the children had created stress. Shanann was pregnant again. Chris withdrew further. He stopped engaging in conversations, stopped initiating affection, stopped reacting emotionally at all. To Shanann, it felt like losing her husband while he was still standing in front of her. She texted friends late at night, confused by the sudden shift. She asked Chris directly if he loved her. His answers were vague, empty, and increasingly dishonest. While Shanann was traveling for work during the summer of 2018, Chris began an affair with a co-worker. This wasn't a brief lapse in judgment. It was a complete, emotional replacement. Chris told this woman he had never truly loved his wife, that his marriage was already over, that he felt free for the first time. What he didn't say was just as important. He never mentioned divorce. He never talked about separation. Instead, he began imagining a future that required his family to disappear. On the night of August 12th, 2018, Shanann returned home from a business trip just before 2 a.m. Security cameras captured her walking into the house. She looked tired, pregnant, unaware. It was the last time she would ever be seen alive. The next morning, something immediately felt wrong. Shanann missed a scheduled doctor's appointment. She didn't respond to messages. She didn't answer her phone. A close friend drove to the house. Shanann's car was still parked outside. Her purse was inside. Her phone was left behind. Her children were gone. Chris was home, and he was calm. When police arrived, they noticed it right away. Chris didn't pace, didn't ask frantic questions, didn't
That's not good
display
enough.
urgency.
Look, it's under control.
Instead, he stood on the porch and spoke slowly, carefully, as if he were already rehearsing his words. He told officers that Shanann had taken the children and left. There was no evidence, no luggage missing, no messages sent, no explanation offered. Shanann had never left her children without telling anyone, especially not without her phone. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline. A neighbor's surveillance camera revealed something critical. Early that morning, Chris had backed his work truck into the driveway, something he almost never did. The footage showed him making multiple trips between the house and the truck, loading items, alone. He stayed there for nearly an hour before driving away. When confronted, Chris said he was loading tools for work. But the explanation didn't hold. The timing was wrong. The behavior was unusual. And the footage told a different story. Police pressed harder. Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. He failed. When investigators told him the results, he didn't get angry. He didn't argue. He broke. Chris changed his story. He claimed Shanann had killed the children during an argument, and that he had killed her in a moment of rage. It was a calculated move, one that shifted blame. But it didn't survive scrutiny. The autopsy told a different story. So did the evidence. Chris eventually admitted the truth. He had killed Shanann first. Then, one by one, his daughters. Afterward, he wrapped their bodies and loaded them into his truck. He drove to a remote work site and disposed of them with chilling efficiency. What disturbed investigators most wasn't just the brutality, it was the emotional vacancy. Chris spoke about the murders with startling detachment. No visible grief, no emotional collapse, no genuine remorse. Psychologists later described him as someone who had emotionally abandoned his family long before the crime. The murders weren't impulsive. They were the final step in a process that had already finished inside his mind. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no trial, no defense strategy, no public attempt to justify what he had done, because there was no explanation that could make it make sense. The house in Frederick was eventually sold. The neighborhood moved on. But the case continues to haunt people for one reason. There were no screams heard, no public warning signs, no explosive breakdown. Just a man who quietly decided his family no longer fit into the life he wanted, and removed them. Shanann trusted the person sleeping beside her. Her children trusted their father. Neither realized that the danger wasn't outside their home, it was already inside, waiting.